Tossing and turning at night? Waking up exhausted? We've all been there. Sounds like it's time to try the melatonin-free CBD sleep gummies from Cornbread Hemp. Cornbread Hemp produces America's first USDA organic melatonin-free CBD gummy. Fall asleep and stay asleep with CBD sleep gummies that are infused full-spectrum, flower-only hemp extract and include natural botanicals like valerian root, lavender, and chamomile. They're vegan, gluten-free, and made without a sugar coating, just clean, natural ingredients. Right now, Cornbread Hemp is offering 30% off your first order. Just go to cornbreadhemp.com/TBD and use code TBD at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/TBD, code TBD for 30% off.
Rinse takes your laundry and hand-delivers it to your door, expertly cleaned and folded, so you could take the time once spent folding and sorting and waiting to finally pursue a whole new version of you. Like Tea Time You. Or this Tea Time You. Or even this Tea Time You.
Said you hear about Dave?
Or even Tea Time You.
So update on Dave.
It's up to you. We'll take the laundry. Rinse. It's time to be great.
If you're listening to this podcast, there's a decent chance you dealt with some kind of internet outage on Monday.
Snapchat, Roblox, OpenAI, Ring. Some people couldn't get into their bank platforms. They couldn't get their flight deals. And, that freaked people out, considering parts of our very online world went kind of dark for a bit. I want to get right to Brian Chung.
They went dark, as you probably know by now, because of an outage at Amazon Web Services, the company's cloud computing platform. So maybe you were me, trying to figure out why you couldn't buy dog food on Chewy. Or maybe you were dealing with a much more serious issue, because Amazon provides a tremendous amount of cloud infrastructure, roughly 30% globally. As one Atlantic writer put it, everything is in the cloud now. But the cloud lives in a real place, data centers in Northern Virginia.
I mean, it's called Cloud Computing Alley or Cloud Alley or Data Center Alley.
That's journalist Samanth Subramanian, who writes for Equator magazine.
In its initial days of conception, the internet was supposed to be a decentralized entity, and decentralization was supposed to make it redundant, foolproof. But what has actually happened is that there's particular parts of the world that are thick and clustered with data centers, and that's where the points of vulnerability are for the internet today.
Samanth has just written a book about that vulnerability and the infrastructure of our modern internet. It's called The Web Beneath the Waves, and it's why I wanted to talk to him after the AWS outage.
I think outages happen a lot, and maybe surprisingly more often than we suspect. And the reason is that redundancy is built into the fabric of the internet in many ways. If there's an outage, your data is flowing through a different system, to a different server, through a different cable, and your internet continues to stay up. So it needs a particularly sort of severe disruption for people to experience a complete outage of the kind that they did on Monday. But that doesn't take away the essential fact that over the last 20 years, there have been these points of pressure that have become more and more acutely sensitive to some kind of disruption. The server farms in Northern Virginia are one.
The places where undersea internet cables make landfall are another, as is the deep ocean itself, where those cables run.
So I think part of the reason why these vulnerabilities have come about is just because the architecture of the internet has been skewed in a particular way that the founders of the internet never thought possible. It's been skewed towards countries and companies and entities that are wealthier and more powerful.
Today on the show, the very way our modern internet is built can leave it vulnerable to breaking. I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks makes it easy to find the perfect gifts and holiday looks that suit your personal style. The holidays can be a lot of things: exciting, relaxing, heartwarming, and yes, sometimes even a little stressful. That's why you need Saks.com. Saks makes holiday shopping easy, stress-free, and most importantly, fun, whether it's for yourself, your family and friends, or even the pickiest person on your list. You can feel confident going into this holiday season knowing that Saks is there to help you find inspiration, curate a holiday wish list, pick out gifts for your loved ones, and have a look ready for whatever might come your way. Whether it's an office holiday party, a cozy night in, or a vacation getaway, Saks has everything you need. If you're looking for shopping to be personalized and easy this holiday season, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to shop for everyone on your list. Let's start with the physical infrastructure of the internet. So let's say here I am in New York. I want to send you, Samanth, an email in London. It's a very simple example. I realize I'm oversimplifying, but where's that going? What mechanism is all this going through?
Some of it is impossible to tell. I can tell you this much, which is that you're sitting in New York and you're sending an email, and that will go to eventually, if you're in a Gmail server, for example, it goes to a server owned by Google, and Google is trying to route it to my Gmail server. So there's a different kind of pathway that it finds between these two locations. But how the message makes its way from you to me is essentially a kind of mystery, even to Google in one sense. And it's because these routing softwares and these routing mechanisms are designed to dynamically find the shortest, quickest route at any point of time. Sometimes it might be the case that it routes itself through France and then comes to the UK via the English Channel. It may be that my particular Gmail address and its contents are not on a server farm in England at all because I moved here 6 years ago. Maybe they are hosted somewhere else. It's really hard to tell. But we can say some broad things. One is that it goes to a big server, and then it goes inevitably to some kind of undersea cable, and then it pops out of an undersea cable at some point and goes to a server farm and then eventually makes its way to me.
I have a 5-year-old, and we spend actually a decent amount of time reading about the abyssal zone in the ocean and the kinds of creepy crawly creatures that live down there. But your book paints this amazing picture of what is happening undersea and what this cable infrastructure looks like and what it does. Can you describe it to me?
So undersea cables have been around, we should say, for 150 years. They were there when the telegraph cables were first invented and laid down. And they've changed over the years. Telegraph cables used to be big, thick copper wires. Coaxial cables, which came later, were still made of metal, but they went under the ocean and they were very thick as well. And then fiberglass or fiber optics started to be used around the 1980s. Those have changed so much that every single strand of glass that carries data is about as thick as a human hair. Typically, what happens now is you put 6 or maybe 12 of these hair-thin glass strands into a cable, and the cable itself at the bottom of the ocean is no thicker than a garden hose. And these are the kinds of cables that crisscross the abyssal zone. Closer to land, because there are more dangers to a cable in terms of ship anchors and fishing trawlers, bottom trawling the ocean, they have to be protected a little bit more. So they're wrapped up in slightly thicker layers of metal. As they come very close to shore, they're pushed into a duct, and the duct goes under the seabed sometimes and then comes up on a beach. And from the beach, they're taken to a landing station, and that's where the data is kind of distributed to whoever needs to get it. These cables are, considering how much data they carry, they've technically, on a per gigabyte basis, gotten cheaper and cheaper rather than more expensive. So a cable from the UK to the US across the Atlantic would probably cost about $500 million at the moment, which is a lot of money. But, pound for pound, gigabyte for gigabyte, it's a lot less than it used to be 20 years ago. And there's like 500 odd cables of this kind across the world. They carry 95% of all international data traffic. So anybody who thinks, we've all gotten used to a dematerialized internet. We talk about cell phones and Wi-Fi, and we think that all of this is maybe bouncing off satellites somewhere and then coming down to us. But that's absolutely not the case. At some point, there's something very material, very physical carrying your data under the ocean.
Who is responsible for building and maintaining all of this? Is it a country, a company, a combination?
It used to be a combination. I mean, about 25 years ago, they used to put together these consortiums of, telecom companies. And back in the day, telecom companies were mostly state-owned in many parts of the world. And so they would come together, 11, say a cable was going to make landfall in 11 countries along its route. 11 companies one from each of these countries would come together, and they would pool money and investment, and they would kind of apportion the bandwidth along similar lines. But then about 20 years ago, this started to change a little bit, and private investors started to come into the picture. And private investors started building and laying these cables. Sometimes they would have local partners just to be able to land the cable, but otherwise they would own part or almost all of it. And then about 10 years ago, it shifted again. It was still private investors and private companies, but this time it was the big tech giants. And specifically was Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft. And these companies have so much money and so much cash that they're able to fund the entirety of the cable by themselves, use it entirely for themselves if they want, because we have to remember these are companies that depend on data to make a living. So right now, or at least a couple of years ago when I was researching the book, 2 out of every 3 new cables being laid anywhere in the world was being funded by one of these 4 tech giants.
Wow. That's a lot of concentration of power in the hands of just a few companies.
And of just one country, because we have to remember these 4 are all American kind of companies. And those 4 companies, as we've seen time and time again, are very vulnerable to pressure from the American government.
I want to talk about what happens when something goes catastrophically wrong. And the example that you write about in your book is what happened in Tonga when they lost internet because of a volcanic eruption. Can you describe how that began? You paint this incredibly dramatic scene when you write about it.
Yeah, I mean, I start the book essentially with this one guy in Tonga who was, I guess, like a local agent for DHL.
The shipping, the packaging company.
Yeah, so he had a local DHL office, and he was at home one day, and he'd been expecting this undersea volcano off the coast of Tonga to blow up. There'd been alerts over the previous few days, but then when it blew up, he knew because you hear the sound. And so the minute he did, he went out to pick up his daughters who were at a friend's house, and as he was driving back, he was on the phone with his relatives using a data connection, and it cut up. And so he thought, well, this is just a temporary outage. Maybe the power has gone off or whatever it is. So he went home, and the landline wasn't working as well. And so they waited. And it was not until 12 hours later that they figured out that the one international cable that connects Tonga to the world had snapped. And this was because of all of this debris that had come out of this undersea volcano, rushed around on the seafloor, and essentially snapped the cable in 2 parts.
Well, what were the effects? Like, what happened to Tongans? What couldn't they do?
They pretty much couldn't do anything. I mean, Tonga is, for example, a cash economy. Let's start there. And so you couldn't go to an ATM to withdraw any money because the ATMs were offline. You couldn't even go to the bank to withdraw any money because the bank couldn't access its databases, and it didn't know how much money you had in your account. So what would they give you? The government couldn't get in touch with any of its citizens the way it usually did through cell phone alerts. Tongans couldn't call overseas. There were some strange cases. There was a woman I met who was living off the grid, or so she thought, in one of the outlying islands of Tonga. She had a solar panel on her roof, and when the volcano blew, she thought, at least I'm okay for power. A few days later, the solar panel went out, and she wondered why that was. So she went up, and it seemed fine. It wasn't damaged. And then they discovered that the solar panel was programmed to update its software every few days, and it had to connect to the internet for that. And if it couldn't do that, it just bricked up. And I don't know if you remember this, but on Monday after the AWS outage, there were people complaining that their bed didn't work.
Yes! The 8 sleep beds, the fancy beds.
That's exactly it. So many things we think of as analog devices in this day and age are actually digital devices. And when they break down, when the internet breaks down, almost everything stops working.
How did they eventually fix the internet in Tonga?
It took a while. So initially they had to first kind of get a satellite phone unit out of storage where they'd put it, pay their subscription because they hadn't paid that in a while. And once they had that, they could call for help, and then they could summon the company that is contracted to make cable repairs in that particular part of the world. That company needed the better part of 5 months to survey where the cable had been cut, then go and pick up extra cable, then come back, then reattach the cable. All of that happened over the course of the next half year or so. And after that, the main island of Tonga, which is called Tonga Tapu, that got internet, but the outlying islands still didn't because a domestic undersea cable had broken as well. And that cable took 18 months to fix.
18 months?
18 months because they had to manufacture the cable afresh. And the demands of a country like Tonga in manufacturing cable, when it goes to the manufacturer, they don't rank very high compared to when Google or Microsoft are going to the same manufacturer and saying, we want new cable. So it took the better part of a year to make the cable, another sort of few months before they could get the cable out to that distant part of the world and then lay the cable. So essentially, they survived initially with satellite phones for emergency uses, then a couple of satellite dishes that were linked to the internet. Eventually, Starlink donated a bunch of units, and so they set those up in public places around Tonga Tapu and this outlying island of Vavau. There's a paradox over here that I wanted to point out, which is Tonga has only one cable going out to it because it's, relatively speaking, such a peripheral part of the world economy. The flip side of that is when that cable goes out, because it's such a peripheral part, there isn't as much chaos as you would expect there to be. People do learn ways to get on with their lives. Nobody's trading millions of dollars on the London Stock Exchange every alternate minute. The sense of community is still strong. So life wasn't as disruptive as it would be if London, for example, lost all of its internet connectivity, or New York, or Beijing. And I think those are like much bigger disastrous cases that promise much more chaos.
When we come back, shouldn't there be, a better system? Shape the future of enterprise AI with Agency, AGNTCY. Now an open-source Linux Foundation project, Agency is leading the way in establishing trusted identity and access management for the Internet of Agents. The Internet of Agents is the collaboration layer that ensures AI agents can securely discover, connect, and work across any framework. With Agency, your organization gains open, standardized tools and seamless integration, including robust identity management to identify, authenticate, and interact across any platform. Join industry leaders like Cisco, Dell Technologies, Google Cloud, Oracle, Red Hat, and more than 75 supporting companies to set the standard for secure, scalable AI infrastructure. Empower your company to deploy multi-agent systems with confidence. Is your enterprise ready for the future of agentic AI? Visit agency.org to explore use cases now. That's agnTCY.org.
Have you ever wondered about the digital infrastructure that powers today's biggest tech trends? Interconnected, a new video and podcast series from Equinix, offers a rare look at the technology driving the innovations of tomorrow, from the edge compute and cloud systems to ultra-reliable networks and everything in between. Through candid conversations with industry experts and visionary thinkers, Interconnected's hosts guide you through emerging megatrends in tech, the infrastructure making them possible, and the connected future they're shaping. They dive deep into the systems behind AI, automation, quantum, and beyond. The first episode of Interconnected covers the AI renaissance in the medical field. Join the discussion on how society would not be on the verge of an AI-assisted medical renaissance without the near-instantaneous network of interconnected data systems. Discover the digital infrastructure powering today's biggest tech trends with Interconnected. Follow Interconnected on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
How representative was what happened in Tonga? Because you kind of naturally wonder, like, okay, well, could something similar happen in a bigger city, in, maybe still an island, the UK, where you are, you're on an island. Could it happen there, or is there enough redundancy that it's less likely?
It's definitely true that if you're an island with one cable running out to you, the chances of that cable getting cut and you being thrown into some kind of disarray are greater. I think because the internet has grown so integral to our lives, bad actors have started to realize that this is a point of vulnerability. And countries are starting to realize this as well. One part of my book talks about the case of Taiwan. Taiwan is an island, is very central to the world economy, is uniquely geopolitically vulnerable, has 15 undersea cables coming out to it, and is not only in like a geologically active zone like Tonga, but is also cheek by jowl with its biggest sort of geopolitical rival, which is China. And so it is not inconceivable that in some future, hopefully avoidable scenario of war, China would go out and cut all these 15 cables. Cables have been cut during acts of war. I mean, the British cut German telegraph cables during World War II. So this is not unforeseen, and the Taiwanese know it. And they know also that not only is it possible during wartime, but it has probably already happened during peacetime. But even the UK is now so acutely aware of the risks and sensitivity of its undersea infrastructure that it's commissioned a marine navy ship to patrol the waters around the island constantly just to make sure that this infrastructure is safeguarded. And in any case, I think like even the rupture of a few cables is enough to cause some kind of chaos for the British government or for other governments to think deeply about how to protect this stuff.
Right, because when you think about sort of destabilizing geopolitical events, it doesn't have to be a total outage. It can just be chaos that sows mistrust and fear and kind of general unpredictability.
I think that's right. And, even in peacetime, military analysts are starting to say that there's something called gray zone warfare that's conducted quite routinely. They accuse China of doing this a lot. Chinese boats dressed up to be fishing boats or trawlers going out into the open sea to conduct sabotage operations on cables or other infrastructure. So they call it gray zone because it's not open warfare as yet, but it's not entirely, obviously, an accident.
There are some backup systems, satellite internet for one, but remember, those undersea cables carry 95% of all international data traffic. How did we end up with a system with such concentrated potential points of failure?
It's a really interesting thing. If you look at the telegraph map of the 1850s and you look at the undersea cable map of today, you will see that they are almost nearly identical. It's kind of crazy. And the initial telegraph lines, we should remember, were laid primarily by the British. The telegraph was an imperial project. It was meant to sort of connect the parts of the British Empire. Subsequently, of course, there were other important colonizing countries that laid their own telegraph cables. And so these cables went exactly where these big countries and these powerful and wealthy entities wanted them to go. And that has never really gone away. maybe there's new centers of power in the sense that the US was not as powerful then as it is now. China was not as powerful then as it is now. But by and large, the connections that are made by undersea cables today are still between the same centers of wealth and authority. So there's so many cables going between Western Europe and North America. There's now more cables going through Southeast Asia than there used to be. There's a lot of cables that go out to India, but there's otherwise not many cables at all linking the more remote parts of the world. Africa, for example, is woefully underserved by the cabled internet. And this just reflects the fact that, by and large, the state of power and wealth has not really shifted that much in 150 years.
So the short answer is colonization.
Pretty much. And sort of just the persistent nature of capitalism to remain in a few parts of the world.
Are the people you spoke to who think about and focus on internet infrastructure concerned about this concentration and its potentially fragile nature?
I mean, they think about it all the time, but they don't see a way around it in one sense. They don't see a way in which, for example, an island like Tonga could have two cables running out to it so that one of them is redundant. Because Tonga doesn't have the money to pay for a cable by itself, it would require an act of generosity by one of its neighbors like Australia or New Zealand, or a body like the UN for it to get a second connection. And that then goes for so many other countries around the world. Africa, for example, is now being cabled up in a hurry because I think people seem to see this huge underserved population as a massive audience for the internet that's waiting to come online.
By whom? By Chinese companies?
By Google and Meta, actually. But the flip side of that is anything, European countries now have this rule where they tell these tech companies, you're allowed to operate here, you're allowed to lay your cables here, but the data of our citizens stays on our soil. The African countries don't have that leverage because if they had that, if they wanted to insist on that, they may never get these cables running to these countries at all. So that's one big problem. The second problem that people think of all the time is what they call the bifurcation of the internet. And this largely has to do with the enormous animus between China and the US at the moment. So the Americans don't want Chinese internet companies and technology companies to supply any equipment to any future cable projects, any ships to lay these future cables anywhere in the world. They don't want cables running from China landing in the US. So the American government determines to a large extent where a lot of these cables go and who lays them. And so the Chinese, who have a couple of big cable laying companies of their own now, are essentially forced to sort of duplicate routes quite often. And so there's maybe two cables running from Singapore to Australia where one would do. And so then you start to think about what kind of data flows through each of these cables and whether imperceptibly the internet itself is kind of splitting apart into these two sub-networks, one controlled by the Americans and one controlled by the Chinese.
And we're currently seeing, obviously, the major tech companies here in the U.S. doing a lot of what the Trump administration wants. I mean, that seems like a place where any political actor could exert a tremendous amount of pressure on one half of the internet.
And has been doing all the time. I mean, of course, it's sort of been exacerbated now, but this has been a U.S. government policy for a long time.
Regardless of who's in the White House.
Yeah.
Last year we had the big CrowdStrike outage. This week we had the AWS outage. And on the one hand, those things were fixed. We are talking about many redundancies. On the other, we do more and more and more of our everyday things online. And I wonder if you think big outages are something that might become more commonplace.
It's difficult to say. I mean, you could say simultaneously that they will become more commonplace. And you could also say that because of that, companies and institutions will learn to sort of build redundancy into their networks. It's one thing for a hospital to suddenly lose internet access because then it can sort of rely temporarily, let's say, on a Starlink that's there for emergency purposes. It's a different thing altogether if the outage is occurring on a server farm somewhere controlled by Amazon, because the hospital can then do nothing about that. Starlink won't help in that situation because the essential problem here is that you're not able to connect to the server of the website that you're trying to access. So I think more than anything else, it's the companies that run these cloud storage services that need to think about redundancy more and more. And how they'll do that I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not a technical expert enough to kind of figure this out. And look, there might be people from the industry who say, think about how often you use the internet every day. And if that means that for a few hours every year on average, you kind of lose access to it for a little bit before it comes back online, that's not that bad a ratio. But it's different for you trying to order dog food and Chewy versus a hospital trying to contact a database to fetch essential medical data.
So when you were reporting your book and you talk to people who worry about this every day, what are the kinds of solutions that they think about?
There's simple solutions and there's sort of more complex ones. I mean, the really simple solutions, for example, have to do with more cables. You need sort of more cables, taking geographically different routes, landing in different parts of a country. Let me give you one example. When the telegraph lines were laid to India back in the 1800s, they used to land on the west coast in a city called Mumbai and on the east coast in a city called Chennai, which is where I'm from. 150 years later, all these fiber optic cables still pretty much land on these two cities only. It's just because that's become the custom, that's become the tradition, and so that's where they land. That's where the infrastructure is. So part of this redundancy would involve finding other cities to land in and build data centers in. They would involve sort of really budgeting for power demand, because I think the more and more data servers we build and the more we start to use AI, the demand for power is going to go up. And so, budgeting for power is like another example. And then there's sort of like more abstruse, really sort of technologically complicated solutions that people think about. But the principle still holds, which is that the internet has to diversify in a number of ways and ironically move away from this kind of centralized structure that it has at present if it has to truly survive and thrive.
That seems at odds with the demands of capitalism.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
So if you're listening to this thinking, well, wait a minute, should I worry about this? What do you think? Should lay people worry about this?
That's a good question. And I find it difficult to answer that because, I've been obsessing over the internet and its infrastructure now for 3 years. But it's difficult on a day-to-day basis. It's just human, I guess, that when the internet is available for you on tap, as it were, you don't really tend to think about these scenarios in which it will go away in a cataclysmic fashion. It's like somebody saying, one day all the oxygen could be sucked out of the atmosphere. Do you worry about that? Yes and no. But I think the people who do worry about it are people who are not fortunate enough to live in a place as connected as London or New York. And I think for those people, the lack of internet is a livelihood issue. It's a lifestyle issue. It's sort of like being deprived of another basic human right, because essentially the internet just determines how you can make money and who you talk to and what your connections in life are and all of these other things. And I think I do worry about that part. I worry about the fact that there are many, many, many millions of people in the world who should be much more online than they are at present. And I don't mean that from the point of view of scrolling Twitter. I just mean they should be able to get online.
Samanth Subramanian, it is such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Samanth Subramanian is a journalist with Equator magazine, and his new book is The Web Beneath the Waves, The Fragile Cables That Connect Our World. It's really great, and you should check it out. All right, that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Patrick Fort and Paige Osborne. Our show is edited by Evan Campbell. Mia Lobel is the executive producer here at Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. If you are looking for more Slate podcasts to listen to, I highly recommend you check out today's bonus episode from our friends over at What Next. It is spooky season. They're trying to figure out if it's possible to still do a topical or political funny costume in these times. To hear that, you're going to need to sign up for Slate Plus. You can join by going to slate.com/whatnextplus, and we will be back on Sunday with another episode. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
Doug. Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu, is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.